Hi, Louise. Thank you for joining us again on Safeguarding Redefined. Your last episode, which was the ADHD dilemma, shot to one of our most listened to episodes. And so we thought we should do a series on neurodivergence. As a result, we thought we'd get you back on because there's a topic that we only lightly touched on in our last episode, which is ADHD in girls. And that is one of the topics you're most passionate about. So let's revisit one of the questions we asked, which is, how does ADHD in girls often present?
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me back. And you're right, this is a passion of mine. So let's get into it. So, differences between boys and girls. Top difference, boys are much more likely to be diagnosed. Let's be honest. It's 2 to 2.5 times more likely for a boy to be diagnosed. And that's primarily because of the way that their ADHD symptoms present. So, we're not saying that the vast majority of boys are hyperactive, but in some ways they are. In girls, there tends to be there is hyperactivity, but it tends to be more internalized. So with it being internalized, it's then more difficult to spot. Some of the traits, if you are familiar with them, are not that difficult, but if you're unfamiliar with them, it's going to appear to be something other than what it is. And what that tends to be is it could come out as anxiety. It could come out as willfulness or being naughty or perfectionism, overthinking, worrying too much about how others perceive you or how others respond to the work that you're doing. They'll often be out to please and might want to go above and beyond. And again, if they don't get the kind of recognition that they're striving for, that they're working so hard for, they might respond to that in a negative way. So when I did my study into girls with undiagnosed ADHD in secondary school, that was one of the key findings, this idea of struggling with identity. And what some of the participants, when I interviewed them, said was that they thrived off the praise and that validation. So they worked really, really hard for all of that good feedback. And if it came to them, wonderful. They felt validated, it spurred them on, and it actually worked as motivation. Now, if we know anything about ADHD, we know that motivation can be impaired and that it can be very difficult to get going on a project and know where to start, and overwhelm kicks in. So with the idea of praise being a big motivating factor, they will strive for that, which is fantastic. You know, as a teacher, you're like, well, that's wonderful. You keep working away there. But in reality, what tends to happen then is either an adverse reaction when they deem that praise is not all that it was cracked up to be. You know, it wasn't worth the amount of effort that they put in for the kind of praise that they got, or worse still, they don't get recognition, they don't get the praise, and then they can go the other way. So it's not a short and sweet answer to your question, because it's a huge topic and every individual is different and responds differently. But I'd say key findings would be that there's more internalization, there's more rejection sensitivity dysphoria. That's kind of what I was linking in before about motivating and praise. If, for instance, they get some feedback and they see it as negative, which if they have got rejection sensitivity dysphoria, they're more likely to take it from a negative standpoint. And then really it's a case of it then transfers into like low self-esteem and low self-efficacy. And yeah, so sorry I couldn't be succinct with that answer. There is a lot to it, but I think if I was going to really pinpoint it, it would be that internal hyperactivity.
I think the problem is that people have tried to make it too succinct in the past, and as a result, it's still very, very misunderstood. And this is why we've been very happy to kind of go, right, it should feature again on Safeguarding Redefined, because there is a significant amount of safeguarding concerns that you have raised there, which is essentially like if someone is really, really struggling, they're more likely to be burnt out. They're also, if they're not doing very well in class, there is the potential that they could end up spending more time out of class or avoiding school altogether. And so therefore that is linking to another safeguarding concern. I mean, we're all about interrupting the potential for harm, and why not start in its infancy and get a
Yeah.
better understanding of ADHD in girls? Because let's be honest, there's a lot of ADHD in boys that we know about, but we don't know enough about things like the inattentiveness, the
Yeah.
other symptoms that can make it look like a child is being rude or just being actively defiant. Whereas actually, it's genuinely it's a
Yeah.
naughty that they've got that they're trying to overcome, but they just don't have the ability to do so.
Absolutely. And that feeling of being different
Mm.
in a classroom, or, you know, we both have ADHD, so I'm assuming you know what I'm talking about when I say that. Those moments when, you know, the fuel tank is empty and your brain wanders off onto a different topic while there's an explanation happening in the classroom, and then all of a sudden you're back in the room but you've no clue what's happening. Now, that might seem like a bit of a try. Oh yeah, that happens regularly. But when you're in school and you can see that other people seem to be getting it and seem to be rolling with it, and you're there on the periphery going, why not? Why can't I? And there's all that comparison going on. What can happen is self-sabotage. So instead of sitting there and waiting for that backlash from the teacher because you're having to ask for the instructions to be explained again, you choose to be naughty, defiant, and do something to get yourself chucked out of that classroom. And I don't say that without evidence, because I interviewed women for my study, and that was two of the women said that it was preferable to be outside in the corridor or down the corridor with the head of year, or actually just out there somewhere hiding in toilets or taking yourself off home, than it was to be in that classroom and be in that really uncomfortable situation.
I think it's also you tend to pretend that you're okay with certain things, like you're oh yeah, I'm the one that's always disruptive, or I'm the one that will go over and above in situations, you know, and you kind of long for that. I mean, there is a hidden irony actually with what you said a second ago, which is about the fact that people could be talking about things in a class, and you're still stuck on the point that they were talking about ages ago because your mind decided, well, we're just going to go on a little journey for a second. And the irony of that is that in my first ever training course for level 1 and level 2, before I went on to do the DSL courses, I still remember it to this day, where I'm sitting in this room. There was so many distractions around. We're by a main road. There was some road works going on. There was some building work as well. And I was sat next to a mate of mine. And notoriously, I just muck around with him anyway. We would always find the little things really, really funny. And I remember throughout that course, every 10, 15 minutes, I was saying, oh, what did they just talk about? We gone on to another bit now. And he's like, yeah, we're not in that book anymore. We're in that book now.
Yeah.
And I remember there was 3 books in front of me. That was death by PowerPoint as well, which is never
Yeah.
a good idea for me. And so, yeah, I struggled throughout the whole day. And I remember when it got to the lunch break, I just needed to sit in a quiet room on my own. And
Yeah.
there wasn't many spaces to go do that. And I didn't know at the time, obviously, why that was. Not having a full understanding of what the way my mind worked at the time. This is going back quite a number of years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really struggled. And it
Yeah.
was just the overwhelm after that. And so when we got to the second day, I was done. Nothing was going in. But yes, I'm here now, though. I love safeguarding. I've been doing it for a number of years, but it was a journey to get here.
Yeah. I got that chokehold feeling when you were talking about that sudden realization that you're not in that book anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you have to weigh up, is it worth asking the person next to me? In which case that's going to get them behind. And then the teacher will have moved on 3 or 4 paces, and then everybody's behind, and then nobody wants to talk to you ever. So yeah. Yeah. Very, very familiar with that. Very familiar with RSD as well, and anxiety. It's interesting that I was a coach in a 6th form college, and I coached 3 girls who all had ADHD. One suspected that she had and came to us and said. The other had no idea, but we were 99.9% sure she was ADHD. And the other one had ADHD. And the third one, she was fantastic and had managed to get grade 9s and 8s in all of her GCSEs, but never picked up a pen. Her auditory processing was out of this world phenomenal. And she was what you would call your archetypal naughty girl, breaking every rule in the book, being asked to, I want to say suspend. I don't know, it might be 27 years in education. I still want to say the word suspension. But you know what I mean? So she was really on the cusp of actually not making it to the end of school. And next thing, she's found herself in this high achieving sixth form college with absolutely no coping strategies whatsoever, because the way she coped was to take herself out of class whenever she wanted to and go and find a head of year or find a teacher that was kind of acting as an informal mentor, offload. And that was the way that she managed her overwhelm and her anxiety around it. She basically presented herself as the naughty girl. But the reality is that they are far, far more vulnerable and sensitive than the neurotypical girl, even though they come across as the absolute opposite of that. Like, they look strong and they look powerful and they look like that, you want to get out of the way of them if they're coming towards you in a corridor. In reality, the soft underbelly of those girls, it's something else. And she ended up, she got through A levels, but it was with a significant amount of mentoring, and her overwhelming anxiety around exams and around failing was massive. And I say all of this because she was lucky to get through school. The other girl, the girl with ADHD, again, she kind of figured out her own way of managing school. And what came to light is that she never went to form time. She went to her favorite teacher and would sit with her and talk and calm down and talk about passion projects and things. She wouldn't go to assemblies because there was far too many people. But that wasn't a school run thing. That was a school being flexible about the needs of that student and being empathetic without actually putting it into any kind of a policy, if that makes sense. So in terms of policy, and those people who are listening to this who are policymakers, that empathy and flexibility, and not worrying if you are putting something in place for a student that other students might deem as being a bit like you're favoriting that person, or you are giving them special treatment. I know that that's the fear of most policymakers. Like, it's got to be a one size fits all. There's got to be equity across the board. And I'm afraid that's not how it works, and it cannot continue to work if that's the way the schools run. It cannot continue to work like that. So, yeah, sorry, soapbox. I'm going off on tangents as well. I'm so sorry.
It is actually linking on to what was going to be my next question, which was that, what can we do? And I think you raised a really good point there. Is the policymakers need to realize that it is okay to be slightly flexible. We have to be with safeguarding as well. As the fact is, there isn't a one size fits all with safeguarding. And what I want to kind of get across in this episode, one part of it, not only is the better understanding of ADHD in girls, but it's actually, how can we interrupt the potential for harm? How can we make sure the way that we're doing things isn't going to make things worse for people in later life, which is obviously what we're going to talk into a little bit later, which is about the fact that what we do now with the younger people could harm them as they're getting older. And we need to make sure we do things right now so that we don't bring that harm to them and we're not the cause of harm to them in the first place. So you mentioned there about being flexible and actually going, right, okay, we don't want the other children, other students to think that we're being to like favoritism, as it were. What is it could we do to approach that? How can we make it not look like we're singling them out?
So there's two things. Maybe one I want to circle back to, which is puberty, and what to kind of expect or look out for. But maybe we'll come back to that later. In answer to the question, every single person that either I've come into close contact with, either as a teacher, mentor, coach, they've all had one thing in common, and that is a strong relationship with one or two teachers. Now, that's come about organically. Obviously, teachers are incredibly busy, but we can't ignore the fact that it is vocational. As much as pay rises and all the rest of it are nice, ultimately, for the amount of work that gets done, the pay doesn't even come close. So what we then have are huge numbers of teachers who genuinely care about students. And we've all had those students who we've had close relationships with, and there'll be a knock on the classroom door, not during lesson time, and you end up having a chat with them, you counsel them, you mentor them, and that every single young person that I've spoken to has managed to get through school because of those relationships. So I think rather than it being an organic, kind of a loose individual by individual arrangement, maybe there needs to be something more secure and more, tangible in place. So maybe a mentorship scheme, maybe giving teachers responsibility for that, maybe making sure that timetables are more flexible so that they can meet with students on a one-to-one if they need to, not always kind of jump into the one conclusion of you've been willful, you've been naughty, you've not thought that for whatever. Having that conversation, even if it's just 5-10 minutes, what that basically does is it allows that individual to feel seen and to feel heard, and that is everything.
Yeah.
And I know that the pace of schools is insane, but if you really want to solve this problem, you have to put the time and the money into it in order for everybody to feel inclusive and to feel safe. Because ultimately what will happen is that they will feel discarded, they will feel angry, the anger that they'll feel towards that will be palpable, because we know that controlling emotion is a key issue with ADHD, particularly going through puberty. So you are going to feel the backlash, and that's going to take time anyway. So you might as well be more formal about it and really think hard about how it could be integrated into the school culture so that it's not ad hoc and it's not left for the student to forge those relationships. It's actually a bit more formal than that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And just before we did this recording, I was just putting some finishing touches to a course for a university, which is on navigating difficult disclosures. And one of the first lies is they chose you. They may have walked past your door a number of times, but they chose you to speak to. And so you are given a great responsibility, but an honor that somebody has chosen you because they trust you. However, when you have to do the whole kind of thing of you should really be in lessons, you need to back it up with, I really want to listen to you and I want to be able to support you. But right now is probably not the best time unless it is obviously something serious. That's like caveat there. But if you need to get them back to lesson, it's not kind of going, you need to go back, off you go. It's going, the reasons why. Explain to them that actually you do want to listen to them. I think that's something to kind of get onto. Now, bringing it back to obviously the common theme that we're going through this episode, which is on ADHD in females. I wanted to kind of just touch on later diagnosis or ADHD when you get older, as it were, in the workplace. And it's because these stats came up that I wanted to read out because I think they're quite profound. And it was workplace challenges. And the study has shown that 87% feel that their career is negatively impacted by their symptoms. And 65% have considered quitting. So essentially what they're saying is that the current design of many workplaces, which favors, as they put it, output over process and uniformity over individual needs, it's not made for people who have ADHD. What can people do to amend that?
I think what you're going to have, if we're linking schools with that question, is what you're going to have as a workforce who have either been supported well in schools and colleges and come out the other end and have their own coping strategies and know what to ask for in a workplace to help them cope better. Alternatively, then you've got people who come out not knowing that they've got ADHD, which, let's face it, is likely. If you've got teachers who are unaware of what the symptomology is, and they are being asked by the SENCO to provide a yay or a nay to, a screening form, it's much more likely that girl won't be diagnosed. So then you've got anxiety, depression, and everything else. I think what ties everything together is overwhelm. I know from my own daughter going into the workplace that it doesn't need to be huge in the way of changes to that support, but it needs to be tailored to the individual again. So, I worked momentarily, came out of the classroom and worked in an open plan office. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It was hell. It was hell. Because the minute you were focused, somebody would walk by and that was it. Boop, gone. And I feel for people like that. So what do you do in that circumstance? If you're in an open plan office, you're a woman, you've got ADHD, you know that you're being distracted.
Mm.
This is where access to work comes in. So this is where you apply for access to work funding. They can support you because they know more than you do. Make that application, and they are absolutely fantastic. They will work with the employer and you to come up with small adjustments that can be put into place that make life so much easier. My daughter did shift patterns. Very, very difficult. And the 2 days that she had off weren't actually 2 whole days. So the burnout was real. So the thing is, we've got so much to give. ADHD is whether male or female, you've got so much to give. So you get all of these little things right that allow them to manage overwhelm and to help them to focus. And boy, have you got a dedicated employee that can think outside the box, can find different solutions to problems that an organization might have had for years, natural leadership skills, you name it. Somebody with ADHD could be a massive, massive asset and not a drain on resources. So I guess workplaces have to move quickly, because I think it was only just this week, wasn't it, that a woman won her case for being unsupported in the workplace and she had ADHD. She partially won it, but that's a big wake-up call. So I think just like schools, training and safeguarding have to be there, and we have to move quickly, because that awareness has grown so quickly since 2020 that we're really already playing catch up.
Absolutely. And I'm finding that in some cases you have workplaces which go, we'll wait for you to tell us what you want.
100%.
But then you have the other side of it, which you kind of go, well, there are some proactive things you can put in place ahead of that. And so actually just merging the two in some ways. But yeah, it's from interview, just saying, is there anything that we need to, because you do have these questions, which is like, is there any accommodations that you need? And you kind of think to yourself, I won't bother in this. I don't.
It's 22, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter literally had that 2-3 weeks ago, and it wasn't an interview, it was an induction. And she was asked, is there any, and she texted me and said, do I say it or do I not say it? And it was a really difficult moment, that, and you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So I said, look, if they seem amenable, which they did seem amenable, just say it. Let's get it out on the table, and that way you can get that support. But equally, my son works in an office, and he went to HR after much encouragement from me, because he was getting into trouble for missing things that were happening last minute, and he wasn't catching them. Obviously, he wasn't always catching them. So I said, go to HR, and he had this big interview, and we filled out a questionnaire. That was about 3 months ago, and we haven't heard anything back, and that's it. So that's where we're at. From a lived experience point of view, it really is, it's sketchy out there.
Yeah, no, I just try. It's like when I have to when someone says, "Have you got any dietary requirements?" and I feel like I have to say to them, "Yeah, I can't have anything with gluten." And then I think to myself, I'll just be easier if I just deal with the symptoms afterwards. it's glad that you get to that stage. You're like, oh, you do the same with every other situation. You just think, I just don't want to cause trouble. But it comes back to the fact that, and like going back to our last episode, we're basically going, we always felt like we were trouble. We always felt that, because of the negativity that we received in early days, because people didn't understand. And unfortunately, that still is around now. So I think if we were to kind of synopsize this episode before bringing it to a close, I think the fact is that people need to have better understanding of the symptoms, not just put it on the generic, they have to be hyper in order to have ADHD. I think that's the first one. It's designing our environments to make sure that it is accommodating everyone, and not feeling like it has to be just because they tell you that they need to have a support with something. It's actually doing, what can we do proactively? Working groups are always good for that one. What else would you say is a good takeaway from this episode?
Yeah, I just want to circle back to, I did mention puberty before, but I just wanted to raise that, because you can have a girl in year 7 and year 8 who seems to cope very, very well, staying under the radar, being that good girl, keeping her head down. And that doesn't come without cost to the individual, inside, that they'll be running a million miles an hour just to keep up with everybody and to look normal. But with the onset of puberty, the impact of that is going to be significant. It might appear to professionals to look like that girl is being willful, has changed overnight, and is making all of the wrong decisions, when in reality, the coping mechanisms that individual had prior to puberty just aren't working anymore. And like I mentioned before about perfectionism and people pleasing, if they perceive the praise and the reward to not be really worth the effort, then they'll just forget it and discount it. And then there are studies out there that show that there is gender bias towards girls anyway. So this belief that boys will be boys, but girls, where's the phrase for girls? There isn't one, is there? So if you're a naughty girl, it's all on you. You can control this. And that's the danger. Like, boys can't control it, can they? They're just boys. Girls, on the other hand, they pick and they choose, and they do get a raw deal. So I think just being aware of those changes and making sure that you're curious about why the changes are there, you're asking the right questions, you're being empathetic, you're treating them like an individual and not just this naughty girl case that suddenly changed and is making all the wrong choices all of a sudden. I would emphasize that. And I know we had mentioned it in the episode, but it's really, really important.
No, that's very helpful. And so there's quite a number of key takeaways there. And you can chuck in there things like flexibility on policies and procedures, and approaches to communication, and having an understanding that once you have been chosen, it is an honor, it's not a hindrance, and to communicate effectively with them during those situations where they need to have support. But that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure and joy having you back on. So I enjoy our conversations because they just go everywhere. There's no point having a script. There's no point actually putting any questions down. I really enjoy it. So thank you so much for joining us again today.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Also, before we leave, it would be really great for our listeners to know about the CPD courses that you run as well.
Absolutely. They tend to be bespoke to the school and the organisation. I'm not one of these CPD providers that just does one PowerPoint and then rocks up with it. So I'm very interested in knowing what some of the issues are within each school or college so I can tailor the training to it. So it really starts with a conversation. So if they head over to my website, www.theadhdteacher, there'll be a link on there to book a 30-minute call, and we can talk about what CPD could look like for your school, for your organisation, for your staff, even for your students, because I offer one-to-one coaching as well. So yeah, there's plenty of choices out there. So I think the first port of call would be the website at adhdteacher.co.uk.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We'll make sure that we put that on the blurb on YouTube and on our socials as well. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the follow button, including the subscribe button on YouTube, so you don't miss another episode of Safeguarding Redefined.